Can you hear me? Is it working?
Yes.
Hello? Yep, there it is. Couldn't hear myself. Hi, everyone. I'm Nick Moline. More people came to this than I thought would, but I'm going to be talking about what you can do to optimize your Drupal site for speed and a little bit about SEO as well. So I'm go ahead and talk about what we will cover. For each of the two topics, we're going to cover core configuration changes to make, Drupal modules that you can install to help with this, some talks about theming, and, well, not so much that. Server software is kind of grouped in with the Drupal modules. I should have taken it off the slide. We're not going to really cover core hacks to super analyze it. I'll touch on them slightly, but I'm not really going to cover it. All right, so first let's talk about why speed should matter to you. Okay. I think that gets the point across very clearly. Google did a study, and some other big search engine people have done studies as well, of the impact of delay on users. And what Google found, this graph here, is they showed that over a 6-week period, if they added, the black line is 200 milliseconds, so 0.2 of a second, 0.2 of a second. The red line is, what's this there? 400 milliseconds, so 0.4 of a second, less than half a second. If less than half a second delay comes up in showing the first page of results, over time, your users will go away. They'll do less and less searches. They found that over the course of 6 weeks, people with a 400 millisecond delay had, I have the numbers directly in here. They did 0.6% fewer searches, which doesn't seem like a very large number, but because it's below 1%, but this is with less than half a second delay. If your page takes 3 or 4 seconds to load, Bing did the same study, but they did it with 3 seconds, and they found that they were losing 6%. You can make whatever joke you want about Google having half a second and Bing taking 3 seconds, but I won't bother. Some people here, they also interestingly found that when in the study, the same conference where they were talking about this study, other people came up and said that they found that if they made their site faster at the front end, they spent less money on hardware, or at the back. If you speed it up at the back end, you're putting less stuff at the front end, like transparent proxies and stuff like that, to make your site appear faster to people. So you actually save money. You can use less hardware. And Google, at the same conference, or a year after that conference, Google came around and said that they're going to start counting the speed your site loads as a ranking tool. So if 2 pages would otherwise rank the same, the site that loads faster will be the one that shows up higher in the search results. They said it's a relatively small factor, but every little bit helps. All right, so let's start with the first thing you can do right off the bat on your Drupal installation that you've already set up. All you have to really, there is a tab called Performance in your settings. If you've never gone there, go there and turn everything on. This is it for Drupal 6. They made it a lot easier in Drupal 7. It's exactly the same thing, but just turn everything on. You'll have a very noticeable increase in speed. I don't recommend, however, on the caching mode that you set it to aggressive, because half the modules you install will just simply stop working. All right, so if you've already done this, if you've already gone to the performance screen, I can tell you about some of these things here, but I'll tell them on the next slide, actually. Particularly these last two, which you can't read because it's very fuzzy, about optimizing CSS files and JavaScript files. All right, so let's move on a little bit to what modules you can install that will help you with performance. So let's start with some ones that you can download over at Drupal.org. And I'll kind of fetch this around in a couple different places. But Boost. Everybody heard of the Boost module? Yeah, Sarah has. All right, the Boost module is fantastic. Basically what it does is for your people who are logged out, it creates a simple HTML file, which it sticks in a folder on your server, and when logged out people come to your page, if this file already exists, it will just throw that up there without doing any of the other stuff that you have that your Drupal site would normally do. This is, simple files load much faster than something that's doing a lot of database calls. So Boost module is fantastic. It does a great job. Unless your site has to cross multiple servers, in which case that becomes a problem, because when you try to invalidate the cache on one, it won't invalidate it on the other. All right. That core performance page had things called Optimize CSS and Optimize JavaScript. What those simply do is if you have 10 JavaScript loaded on your site and 10 CSS files, the first time the page is loaded, it will combine them all into one, remove the extra white space, and make a smaller file so that people will have to make only one request. You can make this even faster for the people if you load this module on the next one I'm going to show you. CSS gzip will take that file, gzip it, make it even smaller, the CSS file. The JavaScript aggregator will take the JavaScript that's been aggregated together from the core thing and run it through JSMin minifier to make it much, much smaller and give it a much smaller footprint. Basically, the less your users have to load on page load, the faster your site will appear to be. I want to talk about two things that are in core already, that they come with your Drupal installation, but they're not on by default, so you just have to enable the module. The first one is Syslog. This seems like an odd thing to talk about for performance, but on every single page load, Drupal has to do at least one database writing to the watchdog log. And sometimes it's writing 5 or 6 things to the watchdog log. This means that it is locking your database server for write use, and it has to finish that before the page will finish loading. The Syslog module takes that away from the database, and it just uses Syslog on your Linux server or Windows server or what have you. You can post to either your local Syslog on the system or to a remote Syslog if you want to pass it through something that analyzes Syslog log files. So this can actually make it so that along with some of the other modules I'm going to talk about, you can do less and less database calls on your page loads, which in turn will make your site load faster and faster. Next one is Throttle. I don't really recommend this that much, because Throttle's whole purpose is to stop people from loading a lot of your site in rapid succession, slowing the site down for other users. Problem is, some users you really want to hit your site in rapid succession, like say Googlebot. If you throttle Googlebot, they're going to say, oh, his site is slow. Even though you're throttling it to try to make your site fast, Googlebot will think your site is slow, and in turn will drop your ranking. So I don't really recommend Throttle unless you really go into it and try and tweak it a lot to make sure that it ignores Googlebot and stuff like that. And you really should only even consider Throttle if you're getting people who are trying to hammer your content and leech it from you. You can ask a question anytime.
Is Throttle host configurable? Can I say, please ignore Googlebot?
I believe that there are modules, and I haven't looked into them much, that make Throttle configurable. By default, it has some configuration, but it's not much. Okay. These other ones, I put these up here on the top because they also are things that you download from Drupal.org, but they require a little bit more server attention in order to make them work, because it's about making it work with something else. Memcache. I'm sure people who've done some development may have touched Memcache before. Memcache is a simple key value store for caching large amounts of content. So as I mentioned before, I talked about Boost, which makes an HTML5 file which is very fast, but it's isolated to one server. Memcache can be distributed across servers, especially if you use it along with not Memcached, which is a daemon that you normally would use with Memcache, but a new daemon called Membase, which allows for something that you query with the same Memcache API, but it can be distributed across servers. It has replication and redundancy, because normally speaking, if Memcache server crashes, all Memcache goes away. Membase, on the other hand, will actually store, it serves everything from RAM, but it also stores a copy to disk, and when you write it to one, it replicates it to another server, so that if one Membase server goes away, other Membase server can take over. Varnish is amazing. It's at its core, it's very simple. It is a reverse proxy server. It's basically a load balancer. But it's been optimized for web apps in a very intelligent way. And there is a Varnish plugin for Drupal that will manage Varnish's cache. So you can set a Varnish server in front of a bank of Drupal servers, and any time a page changes, the page will tell Varnish this has changed, so that in the future it doesn't serve its cache copy. It's kind of like Boost, but for a large array of servers, because it stores a local copy of pages, and it's also intelligent enough to store different caches to different types of users, unlike Boost, which is just an HTML file. Varnish can also even cache portions of your site that don't change, like a portion of the sidebar, while leaving the main content to re-render. It's a great thing, and it works with a plugin that goes into Varnish. Unfortunately, the Varnish plugin has a serious requirement, and that is that it will only work in Drupal 7 or in a pre-optimized Drupal install called PressFlow. Basically, PressFlow is a copy of Drupal that has had core hacks done to it to make it faster. If you haven't set up your Drupal site yet and you want to have it be and you know you're going to need it to be fast, PressFlow is a great way to go. It's not very easy to convert your existing Drupal site to PressFlow. In fact, it's next to impossible. But if you're starting off from scratch, save yourself, and you don't want to use Drupal 7, save yourself some time, use PressFlow. A lot of these things are built in. So for Varnish, you need to either use in Drupal 7 or PressFlow. In addition to speeding up your site in general, I strongly recommend you use either APC or Xcache installed on your PHP installation. What these will do will cache the code of your Drupal site so that it doesn't have to run through the interpreter every single time, on every single page load. The more modules you install into your Drupal site, the heftier that load can be. I mean, sometimes you can have easily 50,000, 100,000 lines of code that has to be rendered in order to load a page. APC or Xcache will significantly speed that up. Also, both of them have a cache similar to Memcache built into them, and the APC and Xcache modules for Drupal will integrate with those caches and do things like auto-flush the opcode cache for you if you install another module, which makes it a lot easier, because normally you'd have to delete the cache files on the server and restart Apache if you load a new module. Any questions before I move on to the next part of it? Because I really want to stop talking for about 5 seconds.
Any incompatibilities among those things?
Oh, well, you don't use APC and Xcache together.
Well, of course not.
They are mutually exclusive at the PHP level. Other ones like eAccelerator also work pretty well, but they don't have the Drupal integration. You don't really want to use Boost, Varnish, and Memcache because they all kind of accomplish the same thing. You can use Memcache with either one, because Memcache is good for caching the individual parts of it. But otherwise, no. So you don't really want to use Boost and Varnish because they kind of serve the same itch. I would, generally speaking, these days recommend Varnish over Boost, but Boost is much easier to get going because you don't need to set up Varnish.
Even in a single server environment?
In a single server environment, you can probably get away with Boost. But as I said before, the Varnish has the capability of knowing what user you are and serving a different cache for each user or each account role, for example. If a page is always going to look the same for a certain role, then it can cache that role and actually intelligently serve a cache. Boost will only accelerate your cache for logged out users. If most of your users have to be logged in to integrate with your site, it's not going to speed up your site at all. It'll speed it up for Google, but it won't speed it up for anybody else. So if your site is mostly logged in, definitely go for Varnish. If your site is mostly logged out, Boost is probably okay for you. Any other questions before I move on? Okay. So let's talk about some performance notes for theming your Drupal site. Wait, your Drupal site? No, any site. When you're theming, follow the KISS principle. I'm sure you, as developers, you probably all know what the KISS principle is, but in case you don't, keep it simple, stupid. Or you could flip it around, keep it stupid, simple is what I like to say instead. The less clutter on your site, the faster it will load. The more you can get your code down to the simplest amount of your HTML, this is your rendered code, the less tags on your page, the less somebody has to download to view the page. And this is especially true for images. The fewer images, CSS, and especially JavaScript make a huge difference to the rendered time of the page. And it's important to note that page speed algorithm that Google introduced is not so much about keeping your site fast before the page starts loading. It's how long, once you've got that first byte, does it take to get the last byte. That's what Google's measuring and using as a factor. So the most you can get once you start outputting the page to the screen, the faster you can get from there to the end, the better. Of course, Google themselves is a pretty good example of the KISS principle. There's very, very little here on their homepage, which everybody really likes, and people set it as their homepage because they know it will load very fast. It has gotten a little bit more cluttered over time. Notice they've got this little microphone icon in there now because they have speech recognition built in, just recently launched. But it's overtly simple for a reason. It gets the job done in as few images as possible. Look, I mean, if you look at this, there's only 2 images necessary to render this page, the Google logo and the microphone. And they don't even actually render the microphone. That's rendered by Chrome. So the only image on this page is the Google logo. If you do have a lot of small images on your page, you should really consider trying to sprite those images together. Create one image and then cut it apart with CSS, so that your users have to only load one image, and then that renders all the images of the page at a time. Obviously, you can't sprite everything. You can't sprite large photos like this fighter jet here in the background, but a lot of those little navigation elements, the corners, things around it, if you combine them together into one image and then use CSS to split it into little pieces, it will significantly reduce your page load time. And even though I say this, we haven't actually done it on our site. So all right. Okay, so maybe we'll talk about core hacks a little. As I mentioned before, Drupal's very database heavy. It takes a lot of queries to your database to run the page. One thing that we've done in Core Hack, and unfortunately we haven't released this, but other people have released ones like it, is Drupal out of the box does not handle master-slave databases well at all. It just, you can put multiple servers into your settings.php file, but you're required in your code to switch between them at your own will. one thing that we found has significantly helped us is our system. We made a slight core hack to the way the database include happens, where we first connect to the slave server, and until we have a query that needs to do some sort of write, we stay on the slave. Once we have a query that needs to do a write, update the page, write a session, only then and only then do we even connect to the master database server. And we've found that because you can have multiple slaves to the same master, we're able to get a lot more throughput. A lot more people can access our site if we do things like load balance those slaves. Makes a significant improvement. I don't really go into how we did that because then I'd be talking for 3 hours, and I know we all want to go on. I understand you guys are going hiking for beer. I'm not going for that. But I wanted to throw it out there, let you know that with effort, you can speed things up even more. And our Cornell friends over here know a lot about the efforts we've thrown into speeding things up. A lot of stuff you can, other modules I didn't mention earlier, you can speed up your search by using a third-party search rather than the built-in Drupal search. So you could just use Google search, which works really well if your site's already indexed. You can use Sphinx, which we've had a lot of success with. You could use Solar, which they've had more success than we have. But we're getting it. We're going to get our Solar working, and Solar's great for facets. And it can be a lot faster than the built-in Drupal search.
What is the built-in Drupal search? I mean, is it customizable? To what degree is it customizable?
So the built-in Drupal search works on a concept of faking full-text search. Drupal's search module, which is a module you have to enable, has a indexer portion of it and a search portion of it. The indexer portion runs on cron and looks for pages that haven't been indexed yet. It does a certain number every cron run. And they basically split it up into what words are in there and store it into a different table that it can then search faster than using something like MySQL full text search, which is very slow. It's actually fairly good for a reasonably small site.
Can you control what it searches? Like, can you control what directories it looks at, indexes?
You can, actually. You can control what content is indexed. And it's not really directories because it's about searching Drupal, which is a database-based thing anyway. So it's more what type of nodes, what type of content you want it to search, as well as what you want. You can also set a priority on indexing certain types of nodes faster than others. So if your whole site isn't indexed yet, but you really want this part of it to be indexed, you can prioritize that. And then there are other third-party modules that extend Drupal search a lot. But in general, I mean, there comes a limit. I mean, once you get, 50,000, 100,000 items in your Drupal search becomes slow. Drupal.org had this problem. Their search kept getting slower and slower as more nodes got added to the site. And eventually they actually switched to using Apache Solar. And they wrote a actually really quite fantastic Drupal module for integrating with Solar. I know it gets a lot of flack from people who've tried to use it, like those people back there and us. But it's actually for a fairly simple Drupal site. It's actually really good. It indexes your content with tons of facets by default. So you can actually really facet your search down and say, okay, I just want to search this portion of the site or this portion of the site. You can add in a lot of terms, and it even handles CCK by default. So if you put in custom fields into your nodes, it handles that by default. So Solar is really nice. Sphinx is pretty good too, but Sphinx was never really designed to have textual facets. So if you're trying to facet things based on, say, a quart, you have to, if you're putting up case law as we do and Cornell does, and you want to have a facet based on what quart it's in, Sphinx, you would have to create a number for each quart and make sure that number is stored in the node, which is, less than ideal. Any more questions before we move on to SEO? It does help a lot to submit a sitemap, and this is now making me wish that I had mentioned another thing in a later slide, which because I actually did not include the XML Sitemaps module on my list of modules to install for SEO, which is a major oversight because that is perhaps the single best thing that you could do to make sure your site is indexed. And Drupal has a third-party module for creating sitemaps that is absolutely fantastic. It will create the sitemap, submit it to the search engines. Every time a node is created, it'll update that sitemap and resubmit it. It's called XML Sitemaps. And yes?
Well, finish your thought.
It's in my experience, if you use sitemaps and you submit regularly, you will get index times less than an hour between creation of content. I have seen we use generate sitemaps on our Justia docket site, and it is not uncommon to 1 minute after we put a docket up on our site, it's available in search. It's really quite incredible. They don't guarantee that, and they never will. But in my experience, it works wonders. So have a sitemap, and it's also important to tell Google when that sitemap has changed. So using a module to create that sitemap is a great way to go.
I've got some sort of time intention, right? Because as you know from being up all night, everything does take time. And I'm curious what your impression is as to trade-offs between investing time in this set of techniques and investing time in MySQL database optimization techniques, or putting in faster hard disk arrays, any number of other approaches one might take to making things faster. I mean, do you have a sense for the overall scheme of things where the attention is best invested?
Well, they're both very good things to spend time on. I particularly didn't want to go much into optimizing MySQL in this talk because I wanted it to be something where, for the most part, you can download the plugin, stick it in your thing, go, and your site runs faster. And as such, my voice is, if you can get 90% of the way with a minimal amount of effort, and then you have, why not do that first? So that's kind of my thinking on it. That's why I save these core hack stuffs to the end. It's things like optimizing MySQL, I'd almost consider a core hack. I mean, you have to really get down there, change your table types, change your indexes, and then, like you said, talk about doing RAID arrays with your hardware and stuff like that. That's stuff that is all really good, but it also takes a lot of time, and it takes a lot of testing time to see if you got it right. So my personal belief would be, spend a small amount of time doing the easy stuff first. And then if it's not enough for you, as it may not be, especially if you're a very data-heavy site like the LAI, where there's tons and tons and tons of content, then spend the time on doing things like optimizing hardware and stuff like that.
I got one specific question, though. I've always been curious. This is really more curiosity than anything else. I suspect that my colleagues in the room have actually looked at this, and I don't know it. I suspect that silly database stuff, like making sure the indexes are properly constructed, is pretty well done in the Drupal core module.
For core, yes. I will say that Drupal 6 by default will install everything with my ISAM. Drupal 7 has moved everything over to InnoDB. And of course, my ISAM has table level locking rather than row level locking. So if you're doing a lot of concurrent requests, you do have speed issues there that simply switching your engine type might be significant. So there are a few little niggling things. With third-party modules, things like CCK and stuff like that, it's very hit and miss. CCK, by default, it doesn't really put indexes on anything. Yeah. It's got an index on node ID and revision ID, right? So it's got indexes on that, but it doesn't know if the field that you're adding is going to be something that you're going to actually search on. It doesn't know that. And it really doesn't have any way of doing that. So CCK, by default, I mean, if you stick something in CCK and hope you're going to be able to search on it fast, and you put in 1 million records, probably not going to be able to search on it very fast. Or, say create a view, which is where things like, using Solar and taking that out of Drupal's hands really can improve speed. Because once you use Solar for search and Solar for views, well, it's not a really big deal that the only field that has a index on it is your VID field if, for rendering the page, that's the only field you need, right? So it's definitely not optimized for search.
And as a matter of practice, Dick, when you deal with that problem, do you just go ahead and alter the indices using some database administration tool, or do you go back and forth with the install file?
Typically speaking, I go in and convert and mess with it with a database administration tool. I know in a lot of, my coworker who's not here with me today would probably argue that it's better to change the indices or change the install file so that if you uninstall and reinstall the module, it puts it in the right way. But I find in practice that just adds a lot of time to something that you just want to get done. At the end of the day. Yes?
I'm curious about slow. That was the one place. Not a detail my skill saying, okay, in our situation, we did actually have something where there was a query that took over a second. And I was wondering whether you
There's certainly, I'm not going to say anything bad about reading your MySQL slow query log, because that's definitely the something that everybody should do when they have time. And especially if they're writing the code that's writing these queries themselves, they should take a look and see if those queries are taking a long time. So, huh? I wasn't, not my fault. Yeah. Was it implied that it was? Yes, it's definitely useful to read the MySQL slow query log. I do it all the time. Any more questions in this part? Great, I'm already doing better. I've gone longer than my previous session, so I'm good. And I'm only halfway through. Let's move on. Okay, I put this slide in here because a lot of people would say this is kind of a no-brainer. Why wouldn't SEO matter? But as I was talking to a law school audience, I thought, well, my site's only being used internally by my students. I don't need to care about SEO. And maybe you don't. And if you don't, feel free to ignore me for the rest of this talk, because that's what I'm going to talk about. However, I found it true. I mean, we've created a lot of searches, a lot of detailed searches on our site with our free legal information projects, and almost nobody uses them. Well, okay. First of all, the number one thing is so people can find you. Duh. The second thing is your students and users probably don't want to use your site search that you've spent all your time crafting. They just want to search in Google and hope they get the right answer. Because they're used to searching Google for every answer. So, SEO good. All right, moving on. All right, there's just one core SEO page that you definitely want to check. I'm sure everyone who's implemented Drupal has checked this, but just in case you haven't, turn on clean URLs. I don't think I really need to say anything more, but turn it on. Clean URLs are good. They're better than dirty ones. All right, so just skip right through that, and we'll go over to the SEO modules that you can install, which, as I mentioned, is flagrantly missing one. Yes, John?
My benefit. What do you talk about clean versus dirty? Keep it clean. You are.
So it's not a huge impact on on search as it used to be. But the terms in your URLs are actually indexed. So if you have words in your URLs as opposed to numbers in your URLs, Google will see those words and include them as ranking algorithms. Now, they don't do it as much as they used to because they found people will just start stuffing words into their URLs in hopes of having them show up in search results, whether or not they actually have anything to do with the page that they are on. So Google's really discounted this a lot, but they do still include it. And the little trick, one thing they do still do is if you have the words in your URLs and people are searching for those words, when the URL is shown in Google, it will bold that word, which draws attention to the URL. Also, clean, short URLs are easier for them to copy and paste and submit and give to other people, tweet, post to Facebook, what have you. If it's a lengthy, dirty URL, and Drupal's dirty URLs aren't that bad. They just have a question mark and it says Q equals, and then they have what would have been the clean URL at the end. But the cleanest it is, the better for your users, the better for how it shows up in search. Does that answer your question, John? All right. Okay. So the next thing, once you have the clean URLs turned on, is you probably want, for the same reason that I was just talking about, you want to enable the path module. Path module basically lets you take, and instead of having URLs be /note/243, they can be something like /Google, if it's a page about Google. I just picked something off the top of my head. All right? Now, most people, once they get the path module, they realize that they then have to start typing in path names every time they create a node. They immediately turn and install a module called Path Auto. Path Auto will take the title of your page and create a tokenized version of that URL, of that name, and stick it into the path field for you. They'll let you override it, but they assume that nobody ever will. Warning! Path Auto is great. It will create a nice, friendly URL for your page. If you then go back and change your title, Path Auto will, by default, change that URL and make the old URL not work anymore. Or then you have another option. You select, most people then say, okay, well, that's bad. Well, I'll select the second option, which is make the new URL and leave the old one existing. Then you have something called duplicate content. These things are not good for SEO. URLs that change are bad when people search on Google and then they click the link and your content isn't there. Another thing that's bad is if your content is available on 10 different pages and Google doesn't know which one the right one is, the one you meant it to be. So, you could use Path Auto. It is fine, as long as you also install the following two modules. Path Redirect. Path Redirect will give another option to that Path Auto setting. The option is, they actually give two other options. One is, if you already have a URL, don't change it, which is probably the best option. The other option it will give you is, if you change the title, go ahead and change the URL, but make the old one redirect to the new one with a 301 redirect. So Path Redirect, very important module. It just extends Path Auto. Global redirect's also good too. As we've mentioned, even if you turn on clean URLs, the dirty URLs will still work. Also, if you install Path and Path Auto and create this /Google for a page about Google, /node/243 will also still exist as well. This is duplicate content. This is bad. Global redirect will make sure that only one of those options will work. Even if the other options are perfectly valid ways to get to your page, it will redirect them to the one that you've selected as the real one. So if you install Path Auto, or even if you don't, even if you just install Path, go ahead and install those two modules. They will save you a lot of time and effort in wondering, why is my content not ranking well in Google? Node words. If you want to customize the stuff in your HTML header a little bit, Drupal's not very good at this by default. The node words module will let you set things like the meta description, which is what will show up as a snippet in search results. It'll also let you set things like meta keywords, which you could do if you want to. It's perfectly fine. Will not help you with SEO at all. Because no search engine follows them anymore, because again, it's something where people stuff a bunch of words in there just to get their page loaded. So the node words, depending on how you search for it on Drupal.org, it will come up either on the name node words or on the name meta tags. It's the same module. And by the way, I'm going to put links to all of these on the session page as soon as somebody gives me the ability to edit my session page. Elmer, if you're watching the video, I mean you. All right, along with node words, page title. By default, Drupal will use a very simple title tag for your page. It will be the name of the page, a pipe sign, and the name of the site. That may be perfectly fine for you. If you want to refine it down and put something in your HTML title other than the name of the page that shows up in the big title tag or the big H1 tag, install the page title module. It'll do two things. One, it'll create you where you can create a tokenized version of what should be there by default. So you can define how that title should be. And I'm not really going to go into how you should define your title, but this will help you do it once you've done. It will also give you a field whenever you create or edit a node that will let you just simply put in a custom page title tag. All right? I should add to this list XML sitemaps. Probably should be the first thing on this list. And I was working on this slide at about 5:30 this morning after being up all night working on Justia's next big project. It's not really an excuse because, anyway. So I thank you for asking that question earlier, because otherwise I'd go through this whole presentation without even thinking about it. XML sitemaps, mentally add it to this list right there. All right. Now, there's a lot of these modules. There are a lot more modules for SEO. Save yourself some time. There's a module called Seo Tools that will tell you to unload all these modules and then help you configure them all in one place. Great module. It will also give you a little SEO scorecard that will tell you how you're doing on your site. It will tell you things like, there's a submodule for this that will tell you things like, how many words you have in the different parts, how many words do you have in your description, how many words do you have in your title tag, how many of those words are the same, how you can optimize for better terms. There's a plugin that lets you check how you're ranking or recommend terms based on the content of your site for you. It's actually really nice module, and you can waste a lot of time trying to do it. That's my list of modules here. Before I go on to theming, any questions on Drupal modules for SEO? No. Okay. All right. So let's theme for SEO awesomeness. Nobody likes Kung Fu Panda? Darn, I really thought that was funny. All right. So if you want your site to really rank well, there's a few things you can do when you're creating your theme. One of the best things you can do now is try and start from an HTML5 base. There's HTML5 themes available on Drupal.org. There's a number of them. There's a version of Zen, which is a very popular theming mechanism for creating themes that's based on it. There's one called Fusion that does a really good job. But if you start or even if you're writing it from scratch, start it with some of the HTML5 concepts in mind. These are things like actually using tags that define where your sidebar is by putting it inside a side, where your navigation is by putting it inside a nav tag. If you do these sort of things, it'll make Google and other search engines able to index your site easier and know what things are. The more you can help Google know what the content of your site is, the better. Things like the time tag is really, really, really useful. It's a simple HTML tag that doesn't actually render or do anything on the page, but you wrap a date in it, and Google knows, oh, that's the date this page was created. I should rank it in that date range if I allow people to search by date. You can really help yourself with starting with an HTML5 base as your theme. The same KISS principle we talked about before applies for SEO. If you have a ton of little formatting tags next to every piece of content, Google's going to have a hard time associating that content content with each other. The less extra tags you can have, the easier and the more simple your classes and naming conventions are, the easier it is for Google to be able to identify what the content of your page is. This then extends on to microformats. Wherever possible, if you have information, if you're putting an address, put it in the HCard microformat. If you're putting in information about a person, put it in the person microformat. Google, about a year and a half ago, introduced this thing called rich snippets. What a rich snippet is if Google can identify what your page really is about and identify the individual pieces of the page, it will actually change the search result page to include those elements in a more standardized way. For example, if you ask people to vote in a poll on your page, or if you ask people to vote on the content of your page, say they liked it, if you put that in a ranking tag or a ranking microformat, Google will put that this got 4 stars on the page. They'll put 4 little stars on there. The greatest example I can give to this, not that anybody is doing a cooking site, but there is a really great format for recipes. And if you search for a recipe on Google now, on the sidebar will pull up this whole list of things like, I want to search for things that use chicken, and I want to search for things that are under 400 calories. And Google can actually give people the fastest to sort that thing down. So wherever possible, but not to the point of overcomplicating your page, use microformats to identify your code. The more standard, the better, especially the ones that are on schema.org. So schema.org is the website Google recently launched along with Bing and a few other big partners to standardize. These are the things we're looking for as far as rich snippets are concerned. Okay. Any questions on theming for SEO? Nope. Okay. So I've reached the end of my presentation, and I didn't fall asleep. Shameless plug for the Freelog group. The company I work for, Justia. You can find me on Twitter at Nick Moline or on my blog at nick.pro. And as I'm sure my Cornell friends would agree, if you haven't been to the Freelog booth yet, please go have a cookie.
We didn't fall asleep either, Nick.
Thank you.